The way I'm also able to get through this, though, is that there is nothing that can happen that my addiction didn't prepare me for. There is nothing that can happen that, I mean, no matter what happens, I always have a 0 point to look back on and be so grateful for now. But now I wouldn't take any of that back, because I am such a happier person now. I'm so much more grateful. I am stronger. I've got that base point to move from. And I'm so glad that all of that, that all of that stuff happened. And I'm able to rely on that right now during this time of struggle.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Vision Builders, the show about freedom, what it is, what it takes to create it, to share it, and the age-old practice of leveraging other people's hindsight to bring clarity to our own developing stories. I'm Chu Opara Kalechukwu, if you can speak Igbo, that's how you say it. And with me today is a long...
I say Kalechukwu.
Well,
it's easy for me to say.
Which
Chu
is
does not work for me. I say Kalechukwu.
Thank you for that. This is going to be fun. And so you just heard from Jeannine.
I already interrupted. I'm sorry.
I expected that from you, young lady. I'm so excited to have you on the show today for lots of reasons. Your story, your grit, incredible grit, and I feel like there's just some things that you've experienced over the last decade or so or more that everyone who's even considering becoming a self-aware, responsible person could learn from. And I don't want to get too far in there. By the way, Jeannine, today you are a business owner, entrepreneur. Yes. You run.
You can see the spin studio behind me. That's why you can see all my bikes.
Yes.
There's half of them that there normally are in, depending on when you're watching this, the coronavirus stuff is going on. But yeah, I'm in the spin side of my studio right now.
Yes. And then, but also you have an incredible podcast that you launched not too long ago. Yes. That I'm sure we'll get to talk about a little bit. But really, I've known you since you were in 5th grade. I was in 4th grade. And your dad, strangely enough, actually both your parents, were a big part of my childhood growing up. Your mom volunteered a lot in the community. My mom was the commissioner of children and youth. So like our paths crossed a lot.
Yeah.
And, your dad, you and I have talked about this, Mark, is arguably the single most important reason that I got into my field of work up until before now. I was 9, I think, when I met your dad, and somewhere between 10 and 11, your dad just started showing me how to run front of house for all these concerts that he was like.
That's so cool. Were you just like, how did that come about? Were you just at the amphitheater? Was you talking about at the amphitheater?
Yeah, right? At the amphitheater. My mom was the commissioner of children and youth, and I got voluntold a lot.
Right, yeah.
So I would cross the street from Huddleston Elementary to her office in the amphitheater. Yeah, and she would have stuff for me to do, and sometimes your dad was there, like kind of setting up for like what the next thing was, and I was a bigger than average kid.
Sure. Yes.
So I was physically capable of doing things that the average kid my age couldn't do. And
sure.
So since I was there anyway, it was either hang out in the front office where my mom was with a bunch of other middle-aged women.
Right. Or help my dad, who is very cool as a dad. I think my dad's really cool. He's like a cool guy dad.
He is a cool guy, but he was willing to take me down the hill and show me some stuff.
That's so cool.
And the bug bit me. I started realizing we spent all day putting together this show, and then 2,000 people have an amazing time. And I just saw that connection of work reward.
Cool. Yeah.
And I was just like, man, this is awesome. Plus, I was a musician, and your dad musician, and we just kind of talked about that stuff.
Yeah, he still plays guitar and is so good.
That's so funny. So anyway, he's not on the call though. You are. But
if you let me, I'll start talking about my dad for hours.
I Yeah, well, it's just it's interesting how these things kind of come around.
Yeah.
You know, that's not an insignificant part of my story. And then so
Right.
here we are.
Yeah.
This show, like I said, is about freedom and what our part is to play in that. And I think one thing that people need to know about your story, I want you to tell it,
Sure.
but your early years started off with a lot of freedoms being shared with you. I mean,
Yes.
you grew
I
up
mean, the way that we were raised and
in the way
stuff.
that you were raised, where you were raised,
Yes.
the opportunities that you had. Um, you know, I think everybody can tell you've got amazing parents. Like,
Yeah, we were so privileged. I think anybody growing up in Peachtree City, I mean, how lucky were we that that was our environment? I've thought
yeah,
about this before too. I think our high school, I think McIntosh was the equivalent of an associate's at like a junior college somewhere. You know, the
for sure.
information, the education that we were getting. If you went through like the AP or the advanced track
Mhm.
or, you know, even the college prep track,
Yeah.
I really believe that which was good for me because then I didn't pursue education much longer after that. But I think that if you got through McIntosh, it literally would be the equivalent of like an associate's at like a community college in Tampa or something. You know, we really had.
Well, actually, you're 100% right. I actually took my first lit class in college, and after my first paper, my professor said to me, I see no reason for you to take any other gen ed English courses that you have to take for the
Exactly.
next 2 years.
Exactly.
You have a solid command of the English language and expository writing. And I was like, oh, cool. So how do I get out of it? What do I do? She's like, well, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
You could have clept out before, but
Sure.
now you just have to plunge through. And I was like, well, that sounds stupid. And she said, but you're good at this stuff.
Yeah,
And so, yeah. I learned what bureaucracy was at that moment, just then. So,
but I agree, we have a lot of opportunity, which is why it's really interesting, I think, what happened with me in the end, and why I like to share about it, because it's not the stereotypical story, you know?
No. And I think like right now, just so that we're not talking in circles, you went through a season of your life where you were addicted to drugs, specifically heroin, I think was the big,
just heroin addict for a long time.
big one. And especially now, I think that a lot of times people want to attribute those struggles with a kind of person so that they don't have to face
Absolutely.
it. But you are as close to ground zero proof that that is absurd. That is completely ridiculous as a premise. Because
that's why I talk about it so openly, because to be honest, like, and I think people probably see me, it's when I first got into recovery, I was so deathly afraid for anybody to know. It's actually like wild that I do this kind of thing now, and then I talk about it, and then I have my podcast. I think that at some point God got in there and decided that I needed to be a messenger and changed my mind. Because like when I was first in recovery, there was or not first in recovery, I was in and out of recovery for a really long time. But the last rehab that I went to, the last residential rehab that I went to, was in Oceanside, which is near the water here in San Diego. And they would walk us to meetings on the beach, and you sing happy birthday in AA and NA, which is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. If you get 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or a year, they sing. And they would sing on the beach around people. And I would just duck behind other girls like, oh my God, people are going to see us and know that we're like drug addicts. We're all vaping, smoking. Everybody has tattoos. It's like obvious that it's an AA meeting. And I would just want to die and like bury my head. And, you know, because I had worked in the area, I had been in fitness, and I was so embarrassed. And so for me to have gone in a few years from that to raise my hand and saying, well, I didn't think I'd be the face of heroin, but here I am. Like, it's crazy, but that's why I want to do it, because when you're in that space where I was, one of the main reasons why it was so hard for me, so I used for about 15 years, basically from kind of the last time I saw you till about 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, it was pretty soon after we all left, or, you know, after we went to college. I was drinking too much for 10 years, you know, doing coke, that kind of stuff, like stuff I thought was just Hollywood stuff, no big deal. The last 5 years of my using was really, really, really bad. The last 5 years of my using, I was addicted to heroin and meth and was homeless or incarcerated or in rehabs for 5 years. And I was completely off the grid. There was no way to even know that I was like a person when I came back this time. I mean, no license. I hadn't used my social security number in years. I didn't have any identification. In fact, when I finally got sober in 2015 in January, my mom, I didn't even have an ID. And my mom was like, my mother,
Mm-hmm.
my mom was like, okay, well, what can we do? Maybe I can go to the social security office and I'll sign an affidavit that I gave birth to you in this hospital and I have my ID. And we're like I wasn't even a person anymore in society.
Wow.
Like there's no way to even show that it was me. And when you're in that spot, and I think people think of drug addicts as not being aware. You see somebody on the street and, but it was me. I had the same mom and dad and Danny, who and,
Mm-hmm.
dreams. And it was me. And I remembered. And when you're that far down, it doesn't feel like you're ever going to come back. I felt like I had crossed some invisible line and I had gone too far. And I would have loved to have seen someone like me who had realized a full life again, saying, I did that too. I was that bad also. This is what I did. Because I just would have loved to have seen that. And it's actually really challenging and scary for me to talk about it sometimes. I do it anyways, and it's gotten easier over time, but it still can be challenging. But that's why I do it, because of everything that you just said, because I'm not the stereotypical addict. And it doesn't affect only the stereotypical person,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you said that. There was a period of time when I was working at a church, and in one of my roles was to basically for all the different venues that our church had to basically translate the different media and such for the different spaces. Well, one of the things that church did a lot of was they had a recovery community, a big recovery community.
Okay.
And so one of the roles that I ended up having was like being the audio tech, essentially, an audio visual tech at a 12-step recovery meeting.
Oh, like making speaker tapes and speaker CDs?
Well, no, I wasn't really making those. I was in the room running the AV system, because it wasn't typical. It worked kind of like a meeting, but it was more than that. So, and so I was kind of like,
faith-based. Sometimes they're not. Sounds like it was a faith-based.
Yeah, it was a faith-based thing. So I was the fly on the wall, so to speak.
Yeah.
But also, this was also happened to be the community in which I lived.
Yeah.
And these people knew me, some of them, and then they came to know me also after. And what I started to figure out was that the process of this 12-step process, I started to realize, like, this is something that literally everyone, regardless of whether you've used or not, should work through, because middle school is tough for most people developmentally. And you're going to get some stuff like jammed into your heart space.
And your psyche that never goes.
Yeah. And so I want you to I want to hear a little bit from you about that, because like what I discovered was the 12-step process is not just for addicts. It's just for people who want to live a fuller life, who want to stop disassociating from their pain and start growing through their pain. Like I'm so glad you
brought that up. It's a design for living. Mm-hmm. And it's a design for living. And I think the way that, because the one thing I do get a little bit nervous about with my story is, and I try to talk about the first 10 years, because the first 10 years of my story, I was just drinking too much and not living. I wasn't the person I knew that I could be. Mm-hmm. And that's where most people spend time, not the last 5 years of it, right? And so sometimes I think people can hear my story and maybe they are drinking too much, but they think, oh my God, that was a heroin addict. Like, that's an actual problem. I don't really have a problem. So on the podcast, actually, my next guest is going to be someone that was an alcoholic who drank too much, a woman also in fitness. So I think it's important to visit what makes something a problem is it hindering your growth somehow? Are you paralyzed in some way that you're not able to move forward and live a fully actualized life? And you know in your gut, when I say that, you know whatever that thing might be and if it's a problem, because most people haven't gotten a DUI or been arrested or lost their kids or whatever. Most people haven't done that, but you can still know that maybe there's something going on with you that is an issue, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be substance abuse or alcoholism. It could be shopping or whatever.
Well, I would argue too that anything that causes us to numb our senses, and it can be anything. Research.
Social media. I'll start scrolling. There's so much stuff I have to do, and I'm just scrolling on social media, and I catch myself doing it all the time.
Simon Sinek in his speeches often talks about how we now know that when somebody receives a text message, a dopamine hit goes to their brain.
I know.
And so a lot of times I
literally just looked at my phone. That's what I was doing. But to be fair, I was just putting on Do Not Disturb because it's going off.
Yeah, and that happened earlier as well. So the noise that you guys all heard, that was me not preparing appropriately.
Oh, I didn't hear yours, so that's good. Maybe nobody heard. Good. Mine was people visiting my website, which is good. So I'm trying not to look at it.
Yay, business.
Yay, business.
Right. So
being an entrepreneur during a pandemic.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I think some of what you're alluding to with a kind of a funny wrapper on it is real. The thing about being an entrepreneur in a pandemic is that you start to realize that we might have it harder, but I think we have it better because everyone else is essentially hoping that the powers that be don't poop the bed, so to speak.
Sure.
And,
and we get to be the powers that be. I that's the one thing that, okay, so you guys see me, I'm sitting in my studio. This is the spin side. We have another side also. So I've owned the studio myself for about a year. We just had our year anniversary. I was the lead instructor. I worked here though this is actually kind of a cool story. I showed up here to audition with 19 days clean off of heroin. I was still dog sick. I took the bus here. I had, Obama used to give you a phone when you got out of jail. And they don't do it anymore, but he gave you a phone, not him, but it was the Obama phone is what we called it, so that you could get a job, thankfully. So, because, you get out of jail and you don't have a phone and you need a phone number to put on a resume. And these are the kind of things that people don't think about. You don't even have a phone number to put on a resume, So we were getting these phones. So I had my Obama phone and old spin shoes in a Vons bag. And my mom let me borrow an iPod. And I'd never heard of Spotify or even Instagram at that point. I had no idea what the new mediums were. And all of my playlists stopped in about 2010 because that was the last time that I was aware of any music. And I showed up here in 2015 with a busted ass old iPod playlist that stopped suddenly in 2010, beat up spin shoes in a Vons bag, and I borrowed some workout clothes from a friend at the halfway house. And now I own the studio. So I got that job, obviously, was taking the best 3 hours each way. And, but what I was going to say about that is, so now I own the studio, and it's been very scary because we went into quarantine at about 7 months, right? We'd only been open 6 or 7 months, and then I had to close the studio, and it was a full investment for us. It was in pretty bad shape when we took it over. So my husband and I had to put a lot into it. And then we were closed 6 months later. So what I've been telling myself is if I worked somewhere else, because I was always a teacher at other people's studios. So what I've been able to do during quarantine is that week. So I knew that quarantine was coming. And so I had started scheduling some Zoom classes because I already had some students not wanting to come in. So I had Zoom classes scheduled that week. And then the state of California legally closed us on a Tuesday. And I had a Zoom scheduled for Thursday. So I scrambled to schedule all these classes. We delivered 30 bikes to 30 different homes. We rented a big truck. Fortunately, my husband can do anything. And my husband delivered 30 bikes in a day. We started renting the bikes out and started doing classes online like immediately. And it's been tough though, because you still lose people. I mean, we've obviously had massive revenue loss, you know, and loss of membership. The percentages are like staggering. But what I've told myself is the love of my life is teaching spin and talking about recovery and doing this kind of thing like we're doing right here. Are they're the two joys of my life. And if I'd been teaching somewhere else, I would have had to just hoped that they let me keep teaching online, but I don't know. And in fact, the previous owners of this studio probably wouldn't have. Like, I don't know what they would have done in the transition, but it probably would have been just the two of them. They were a couple that taught, and to save money, they probably wouldn't have had any of us teach. Like, so I've been in charge of that. You know, I've been in charge of keeping my schedule together, keeping my girls all staffed, employed. I didn't cut anybody's pay. And I've been in charge of all of that. And otherwise it would have been exactly what you just said. And I think that that's a really positive way to look at it. You know, I don't have to wait on somebody else to fix something, but it's really scary too, because I'm the person that fixes, you know?
For sure. Well, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out is that fear is not bad.
Right.
Let it be. I mean, Abner, Johnny Swim, you know, the band Johnny Swim, Amanda and Abner wrote a song called Let It Hurt. And I think it was shortly after they had lost their parents and were just kind of going through that. And, you know, a lot of people they try to say kind words to you, but really, like, there's no way around grief. You just have to go through it, right? Yeah. And I feel like when you're an entrepreneur, there's no way around the fear.
No.
Am I going to have what I need today? But the evidence is
you have the stomach for it. You have to have the stomach for it.
You have to have the stomach for it, but you also have to have the willingness to go, but I'm here today, which means that yesterday I had what I needed, and the day before that I had what I needed, and the day before that I had what I needed. It's actually kind of weird to think
being
that
present in the moment is all you can do. And that's something I really struggle with. And that is but I know that that's the key to like making it through this time is staying present in the moment. Do I have what I need today? The answer to that has always been yes. And you're right. Being an entrepreneur has forced me to get into that space more than I was ever forced, because being in the program of AA and going through the 12 steps, we get into a spiritual life, which is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for it. And I wouldn't have done that probably. So I already knew about, you know, meditation and being mindful and being present and being grateful, but taking ownership of the studio and then moving into a pandemic quarantine has forced me to really, you know, I don't love using cliches, but put my money where my mouth is and actually move into that space. But the other thing about that is, and this is my main message with addiction too, if you don't mind if I get into this a little bit, please. The way I'm also able to get through this though, is that there is nothing that can happen that my addiction didn't prepare me for. There is nothing that can happen that, I mean, no matter what happens, I always have a 0 point to look back on and be so grateful for now. And that's what I try to tell other people in recovery. And that's really what moved me out of shame into message, is I realized I'm actually, I honestly, I wouldn't even take it back if I could now. You know, I was going to GW, I had great SAT scores, like all the things you remember, you know what I mean? Like doing the plays, and I was talented and smart. And there were so many years when I was like, what did I do? I'm such a loser. I didn't do any of that stuff. Like, I can't believe what a loser I turned out to be. But now I wouldn't take any of that back, because I am such a happier person now. I'm so much more grateful. I am stronger. I've got that base point to move from. And I'm so glad that all of that, you know, that all of that stuff happened. And I'm able to rely on that right now during this time of struggle. I'm able to rely on those experiences to get me through now.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, isn't that kind of the point? I mean, you know, King David, when he was facing Goliath, was what he said was, did God not deliver me from the lion and the bear in the wilderness? Like,
exactly.
this is not just another set of flesh. Like,
Yes.
I can win
Yep.
here too. And I feel like that's the,
all the time. I shouldn't have even lived, man. I've overdosed alone. Like, I shouldn't have lived. You know, the statistics on this are pretty slim, you know, to be a homeless heroin addict for that long, a girl in the world, homeless.
yeah.
You know, I shouldn't have even made it out, much less doing what I'm doing. And that's something that my dad actually, speaking of my, you know, bring my dad up again. My dad reminds me of that all the time. He's like, you shouldn't even be alive. You know how my dad is. He's
Yeah.
like, dude, you have nothing to worry about. Look at your life. You shouldn't even be here, man.
Yeah.
You think God doesn't have a plan for you? Get out of here with that. You know, like he reminds me of that all the time. And it's so true, you know?
Yeah. I think that's powerful because, you know, I think a lot of people, if they're really honest, can get to the moment where they realize, where they just kind of like the kind of like the so what question. I don't know if you've ever heard of anything like this. Like, if this thing that you're afraid of happens, so
Right. Right.
well, then if that happens, so what?
Yes.
And I feel like we can get ourselves to a place of peace when we take the fangs out of all the serpents that we think are nipping at our heels, when in fact they're really in our heads. Like, I mean, not to, okay, by the way, that's not to say that real threat doesn't exist.
Sure.
That's not to say that if I don't go.
Yeah, 86%, this is a true statistic, 86% of what we worry about doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something that's been measured before. That's a pretty high number.
That's a really high number
of what we fear. But the other thing about right now is too, so like I look back at the addiction and I say, okay, so like that gave me the strength to get through now. And in turn, this is giving all of us the strength to get through the next thing. Mm-hmm. You know, the lowest points in my life are what have helped me the most now. And so I also add to that, not only do I think I get through, this is actually going to help me later. Mm-hmm. And everybody's in this, you know, not everybody goes through it, obviously, but everybody's in this quarantine. And I think we'll all look back in 5 or 6 years and go, man, that was crazy, but we did.
Yeah. And it's true also that shared experience binds people together if we're willing to see it that way, right? Like when I think of the greatest relationships I have, almost all of them have some sort of shared adversity story that goes with it. And like I think that's one thing to be excited about in this time that we're in, is that, I mean, there's some talking heads all over. I mean, I think some of the loudest voices seem to be also the most hopeless, or ridiculous voices sometimes. But the truth that I keep experiencing is that we're kind of going through a trauma together as a world. And that's doesn't happen very often historically. Right. I mean, World War II happened.
I was just going to say World War II, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be divisive. It can be unifying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it is, but I also don't know that we'll see any unification until it's over. It's hard to be peaceful about things when they're happening, you know, but I think we'll get to a point one day where we can all say, and I keep extending the amount of time that I think this is going to be going on for, you know. I mean, I think the trauma of this is going to last with people for years and years, you know, like I'm already implementing some changes at my studio because I think people are going to be scared to be close to each other for a long, long time. But I think it'll be unifying eventually.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I also, you know, I think, you know, I can't remember where I saw this. It's probably me scrolling somewhere and I just didn't even bother to look and see where the reference was. But, you know, this idea that, you know, it's better to change when you ought to rather than waiting till you have to.
Right.
And there were some changes that I had to make immediately when this pandemic started. But one thing that I'm happy about is that I've taken the next step to try to put myself in a position to do all the things, in as much as I am aware of anything that I could do to put myself in a position.
Didn't it give you some time though? Like, so like, I'm just going to guess, and I could be wrong. I'm guessing that vision builders is something you wanted to do for a while, and quarantine gave you the time. Is that right? All right.
In so many words, that's exactly right.
Because like my podcast is something I've wanted to do for a long time. I've wanted to do a recovery podcast for a long time. And when I took over the studio, I had no time. There was no way that was going to happen. Now I've actually had time to do it, and I'm so excited about it, and I'm so happy about that. And I really see some positive development happening there, you know? And this gave me time and the opportunity to do that. I wouldn't have done it before. I was too busy and stressed out with the studio. I wouldn't have done it.
Well, I think for sure, I don't know that it gave me time as much as it made me realize, well, I mean, a few people in my life who evidently care enough about me to, you know, tap on my shoulder.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, man, this thing that you have, this willingness to just go with people and be with them and actually help them see a way forward.
Yeah.
That's something that you better share. Like, honestly, that's, and I was like, I've been thinking about sharing that for, actually, it's funny, before Vision Builders came, I had this idea of like doing a show called The Sweatshop, which was going to be me going and working out all over the place with friends.
Okay, this is really weird. I'm going to tell you something really weird. When I first moved to San Diego from LA, I wrote a little article for a paper down here where it was fashion and fitness, and I called it The Sweatshop. Here.
If I were to pull up my...
You can Google it. If you Google, like, you have to Google, like, Jeannine, Coulter, San Diego. It'll bring up my old sweatshop articles. I went to a pole dancing place and then, like, somewhere else. And I got to go for free, and I would take pictures and, like, write articles. And I called it The Sweatshop. That's really weird. Anyways, really not to interrupt.
No, that's perfect. But the idea was, I just kind of have this belief that we are, if you were to take any two people on planet Earth from anywhere and give them a translator and put them in the same room within about 2 or 3 hours, and also take away any titles or labels or subtexts, you don't get to know like what the affiliations are or what identities people claim. They just get to talk.
Right.
My belief is that any two people on planet Earth will find common ground within about an hour, and in about 2 or 3, they'll be laughing together.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more that we have in common about what we want, what's important to us, what we feel responsible for, what hurts us. Like, there's so much more in common with those things than the world of instant feedback.
Right.
You know, I don't want to just blame social media. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. In fact, we were talking about neuroscience before we started recording. You know, music, certain chords, they are melancholy no matter what language you speak. Is that interesting?
Yeah.
So like music also, that's where I see the most connection, and that's what I try to use in my classes too. Like we ride to the rhythm of the music because there's a universal language there and there's a group connection there. Or like, you know, like a little toddler, before they can even speak, if they hear music, they start doing the thing where they bounce in their chair. They don't know what dancing is, but human beings, they do that. But human being, like my niece, she loves the Trolls, and she'll start like moving her diaper butt up and down with her hands on the table. And like, she doesn't know that it's dancing, but human beings as babies hear music and they just start to move. I think it's really cool. And that's, I get that. So like, we're obviously all connected. We all, and I think the hurts are basically all the same. You know, relationships hurt you, fear of economic insecurity, fear of illness. These are universal.
Yeah, for sure universal. And, you know, to take it one step further, I mean, it's funny, like something happens when music plays to every single brain. Your inner critic, the left hemisphere of your brain, mutes, and the right hemisphere of your brain augments, like it gets more active.
Really?
And so what we know is that when people hear music, their inner critic gets quiet and they become much more accepting about new ideas and thoughts and, in fact, new perspectives. So music...
I'm going to say that tomorrow during my class, during my spin class. I'm going to actually say that exact... So if you're criticizing my class internally, you can knock it off because I'm playing music. But no, that's actually really cool. That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Well,
but the most change I've experienced in my life has been while I was working out to music. And the most
Yeah.
people in my life have actually been other instructors. I mean, outside of, major influences.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's something to that. I think there's something, if music is something that universally people enjoy, also has the power to cause us to be much more open and accepting.
I think that's
There's
amazing.
probably a thread there to be pulled about what really we're here for, like what we're really on about. And man, Jeannine, I wish we could like do a part 2, 3, and 4. Maybe we can.
We can.
Yeah, we can. Accept.
Are you kidding? I'm talking about myself. I can do this. We could do 10 parts of these. If anybody people might remember.
All right. Well, then we should do this, because one of the things I feel like we've gotten a solid introduction.
Yeah.
And people who are watching this probably have an idea of just what an incredible ride you've had. And, the thing is, the reason I say it that way too is it didn't happen to you.
It happened for me.
It happened for you. You participated, but now you're reaping a harvest that you didn't even know there were seeds in your hands back then. You had no idea.
No idea. I was horrified.
Yeah, like there was
That's a really good way to put it. This is my message of hope for other people. I was horrified at what my life had become, and it was the most beautiful thing that ever could have happened to me in my life.
Ooh. I hope that everybody watching this or listening to this, whatever they're doing, really hears that, because some really, really horrific things that happen to us don't have to get the final word.
No, they don't.
Trouble, struggle, hardship doesn't have to have trauma does not have to have the last word.
No, it doesn't. In fact, and that's the other reason why I like kind of putting my story about there, because you think about an addict as having like this real traumatic background. My background. Mm-hmm. My background was privileged and amazing. And a lot of this is chemical and genetic. A couple of things happened to me that would have happened to many, many people, and they don't always go shoot heroin about it. You know what I mean? Like that's not typically the common, response. And so a lot of this is a genetic component, which I try to talk about, get out there and get education out there. But, oh my gosh, I forgot what I was about to say. What did you just say a second ago? What sparked me to
have to have the last word, like your trauma.
Trauma. So in my podcast, what we talk about, and this is so rarely talked about, and this is not my theory. This is an actual psychological effect. You hear a lot about post-traumatic disorder. Mm-hmm. There is also post-traumatic growth. That's a real thing. Mm-hmm. So like men and women, when they're going to fight overseas, like soldiers, mm-hmm. they tell them, okay, you've got 2 ways of coming back. You can come back status quo, which is what we want. We want you to come back, normal, the way that you are right now, or you're going to come back damaged. We want to avoid the damage, and we're going to do X, Y, Z to avoid the damage. But what isn't discussed is there is a third way to come back from trauma, which is post-traumatic growth. And there are measurable ways to see that trauma actually enhanced your life. And it's really specific, and it makes a lot of sense. Like, for example, you typically come out of trauma with a spiritual life that you didn't have, like I did, like going through the 12 mm-hmm. steps. I wouldn't have gotten into reading like Eckhart Tolle or doing meditation. I wasn't going to do any of that when when I was younger. Mm-hmm. I don't think if I'd gone on to law school and done those things, I don't think I would have seen any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And you typically come out with enhanced relationships, which I definitely did. Mm-hmm. You appreciate people more. My mom and I completely changed the manner of our relationship afterwards. And you come out with some gratitude because you lost everything. Like, there are so many ways to come out of trauma on the upside. And so you're not just bouncing back, you're bouncing forward.
Yeah.
And that, I believe, can always be the end result of something that happens.
Whew. I hope everybody who is just listening, whatever device you're listening on or watching this, you have a rewind button. I hope you rewind that and you listen again and again and again until it gets down into your spirit. Because the truth is, once you start to realize that there is growth, that there is upside, there is a version of you that you could not even access without the trauma.
Yes.
You don't have to fear the trauma that you're afraid of, or anything. You don't have to live in fear. You can live in love. You can live with hope and expectation that your story is yet being written, and the things that you're going to grow into and the ways that you're going to be able to contribute are going to shock your wildest imaginings. And man, Jeannine, I am so glad.
Thank you for having me. When I was watching you with the first few guests, I saw like Brian Prawl was on there, and he's like, there's all these amazing people. And I'm like, so I guess I'm a great heroin addict. So I'm like, that's fine. But thank you so much for having me. It's such, it's such an honor to be included in this group of people that you've, wanted to.
Well, the prerequisite to be on this show, really just all it is, like, I have to love and respect you. And I love and respect you. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much.
We got to spend together. And how can people get a hold of you? How can people connect to what you're doing?
So I have a podcast called Chasing Heroin, heroin with an E. And the reason for that is I found myself through drugs. So chasing heroin, like female hero. And my podcast is Chasing Heroin on this day. So we talk about where either myself or a guest was on this day in history versus where we are now and what happened in that incident. Like I had my friend Tommy on a few weeks ago. He overdosed while driving. He died at the wheel. I don't know if you heard this one. He died at the wheel while driving and ran off the road and lived. And growth, what came out of that? What came out of that was he had a stronger connection with people around him than he realized. He developed a stronger belief in God, So the premise of the podcast is we talk about what happened where we are now. So Chasing Heroin has an Instagram. My personal Instagram is Jeannine Coulter, and the studio Instagram. So my fitness studio is called Studio Cybrid, and we're a cycle hybrid facility. So we do half spin, half bar, half spin, half yoga, half spin, half weights. So that's CYBRID. So studiocybrid.com. or chasingheroin.com. I got a lot of stuff going on. I got lots of websites. Studio Cybrid, Chasing Heroin. I also have yoga up where we go through the steps. You might like this too. So like the 12 steps we were talking about, they have principles attached to them. Like the principle of step 1 is acceptance. Mm-hmm. So we do poses that manifest acceptance. Or step 3 is asking for help from God. Mm-hmm. And so in the yoga class, we use like props, like you use assistants. So basically physical manifestations of the principles of the step. And that's all free on the Chasing Heroin website. So Studio Chasing Heroin, Jeannine Coulter. Instagram is where I spend most of my time. So that's where the most interesting stuff is that I got going on. So
That's awesome. And I'll post all those links. And I couldn't be more excited. And by the way, Studio Cybrid, because of this pandemic, you are no longer just in the San Diego area. You are essentially global now.
You made the sale for me. Yes, exactly.
So if anybody
I went to high school with, they're always asking me, they're like, oh my God, I want to work out with you, whatever. And I'm like, well, you can. We have online classes. And I actually just did the math yesterday. So today is what, October 23rd? You could do 3 classes a day between now and the end of this year, and you wouldn't even get through our library of on-demand classes. We've got great audio visual. You don't need equipment for most of them. So there's my little sales pitch. Studiocybrid.com. We've got a full on-demand library also. So
that's dope. Well, thank you for joining us, and for all of you who are out there. I hope that this has been as much of a blessing to you as it has to me. And go build a vision and build a life. Peace.
Thank you, guys.